They had conquered 17 species across the galaxy, and they had never lost a single war. Their method was perfect. Their technology was unbeatable, and when their ships appeared in Earth's sky on a cold morning in March, they expected nothing different. Commander stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Pride and watched the blue planet turn slowly below him. His gray skin reflected the light of the screens around him, and his 4 eyes moved across the data with calm confidence. Humans, that was what they called themselves. Soft creatures. No claws, no armor, no mental powers. They had primitive ships that could barely leave their own solar system. They would fall like all the others. "Begin the deployment," ordered. 2,000 satellites launched from the fleet. They spread across Earth's orbit like a net made of metal and light. Each satellite carried a resonance transmitter, and together they formed what they called the grid. It was their greatest weapon, though it never killed anyone. It did something far more useful. The grid sent out a frequency. This frequency was tuned to the human brain. When it touched human neurons, it did not cause pain. It did not cause fear. Instead, it caused peace. Deep, complete, unbreakable peace. Humans who heard the frequency stopped wanting to fight. They stopped wanting to resist. They became calm and happy and ready to follow orders. They became perfect workers. The frequency spread across Earth in waves. It moved through cities and villages, through mountains and valleys, through every place where humans lived. And wherever it went, the fighting stopped. In New York, soldiers put down their weapons and smiled at each other. In Moscow, generals closed their war rooms and went home to sit quietly with their families. In Beijing, protesters left the streets and returned to their homes, no longer remembering what they had been angry about. All across the world, 7 billion humans felt a strange warmth fill their minds, and they stopped caring about anything except being peaceful. 72 hours after the grid activated, 94% of humanity was under its control. Watched the reports come in and felt something close to boredom. It was always the same. Every species thought they were special. Every species thought they would be the ones to resist. And every species fell to the grid because the grid did not fight against their strength. It simply removed their desire to use it. The landing ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. Thousands of soldiers in black armor walked through human cities, and the humans waved at them. Some even offered them food. The occupation was the easiest in history. But then the reports started coming in. Strange reports, troubling reports. "Commander," one of his officers said, "we have a problem." Turned his 4 eyes toward the officer. "Explain." 6% of the human population is not responding to the grid. Felt his scales tighten. This had never happened before, not with any species. The grid worked on all neural patterns. That was its design. "Show me." The screens changed to show scattered dots across Earth's surface. Millions of humans who had not fallen under the grid's control. They were hiding in underground bunkers, in mountain caves, in deep forests. They were still angry. They were still afraid. They were still capable of resistance. "How is this possible?" demanded. "We do not know, Commander. Their brain patterns seem different somehow. Atypical. The frequency does not affect them the same way." Studied the data for a long time. 6% was a small number, too small to matter. These humans could not fight against the military. They could not stand against the full power of the Dominion. They were simply defective specimens, not worth the effort of hunting. That was what told himself, but deep in his mind something felt wrong, something he could not name. 300 meters below the surface of the Appalachian Mountains, Dr. Myra opened the door of her research bunker and stepped into a nightmare. The bunker was a neuroscience facility. 20 scientists worked there, studying the human brain and developing treatments for neural diseases. Myra had been in the deepest level of the facility when the grid activated, testing her experimental pain treatment implants in a shielded room. She had felt nothing. She had heard nothing. She had worked through the whole invasion without knowing it was happening. Now she walked through the corridors of the bunker and found her colleagues sitting at their workstations. They were smiling. Their hands rested on their keyboards, but they were not typing. Their eyes looked at screens, but they were not reading. They were just sitting there, peaceful and empty, waiting for something that would never come. Dr. Myra said, touching her friend's shoulder, "What happened? What's wrong with you?" Doctor turned to look at her. His smile did not change. "Nothing is wrong, Myra. Everything is fine. Everything is peaceful. You should sit down and rest. You work too hard." Myra stepped back. Her heart was beating fast. Something terrible had happened. She could feel it in her bones. She found a working terminal and accessed the external cameras. She saw the ships in the sky. She saw the alien soldiers walking through the streets of the nearest town. She saw humans following them like obedient children, carrying supplies, building structures, doing whatever they were told. And she understood. Myra's hands shook as she pulled up the facility's sensor logs. The bunker had recorded the resonance frequency when it hit. She studied the waveform patterns. She analyzed the neural targeting data. And slowly, piece by piece, she figured out what the grid was doing. It was attacking the parts of the brain that created aggression, resistance, and independent thought. It was turning them off like switches. But Myra's brain was different. She had experimental neural implants designed to treat her chronic pain condition. Those implants created interference patterns. They had blocked the frequency. She looked at the data for her colleagues. Their brains were normal, healthy, typical, and now they were prisoners in their own minds. Myra sat alone in the dark bunker and felt something burning in her chest. It was not peace. It was not acceptance. It was anger, pure, hot, undeniable anger. The aliens thought they had won. They thought humanity had surrendered, but Myra was still awake. Myra was still thinking, and Myra was very, very good at solving problems. She looked at the resonance frequency data on her screen. The grid was technology. It had been built, and anything that could be built could be broken. She just had to figure out how. Myra spent 3 weeks alone in the bunker before she found the others. She had searched through old radio frequencies, ones that did not bother to monitor because they seemed too primitive. And finally, she had heard a human voice that was not calm, not peaceful, not controlled. "This is Colonel James. If anyone out there is still thinking for themselves, respond on this frequency. We're organizing, we're fighting, and we need everyone we can get." Myra grabbed the radio with trembling hands. "This is Dr. Myra. I can hear you. I'm still free." There was a long pause. Then the voice came back, rough with emotion. "Thank God, we thought we were the last ones. Where are you?" 3 days later, Myra stood in a cave deep in the Appalachian Mountains and looked at the group that had gathered there. There were 47 of them. Soldiers and scientists, teachers and farmers, old and young. They came from different countries and spoke different languages, but they all had one thing in common. They had not fallen to the grid. Colonel James, who everyone called Jimmy, stood at the front of the group. He was a big man with a scar across his forehead from an old combat injury. That injury, Myra would later learn, had damaged the part of his brain that the grid targeted. It had saved his life in a way he never expected. "Doctor," Jimmy said, "you're the brain expert here. Can you tell us why we're different? Why didn't that thing work on us?" Myra had spent weeks studying this question. She had analyzed her own brain scans and compared them to the data she had collected. Now she looked at the group and saw the answer staring back at her. "Your brains are atypical," she said simply. "Different from the average human brain. Some of you have ADHD. Some have autism. Some have had brain injuries like the Colonel. Some have synesthesia or other conditions that change how your neurons fire. I have experimental implants that created interference patterns. The grid was designed for typical neural architecture. Our brains process the frequency differently. It does not affect us the same way." A young woman at the back of the group raised her hand. Her name was, and she was a private who had been on leave when the invasion happened. Her file said she had severe anxiety disorder and was taking medication that altered her brain chemistry. "So we're alive because we're broken?" she asked. Myra shook her head. "We're alive because we're different, and right now, different is the only thing keeping humanity from extinction." Over the next few months, the anomalies grew. That was what they called themselves now. Word spread through hidden radio networks, through handwritten messages passed between safe houses, through 100 secret channels the never bothered to monitor. More atypical humans found their way to the mountain caves. By the end of the year, they numbered in the thousands. They knew they existed. Commander received regular reports about the resistant population, but he considered them too few to matter. They had no ships, no advanced weapons, no way to challenge the Dominion's power. They were a minor annoyance, nothing more. He would deal with them eventually. This was his greatest mistake. Myra worked day and night on the resonance grid. Jimmy's soldiers had captured a small relay station during a raid, killing 3 guards and taking their equipment. Now Myra had access to actual grid technology, and what she discovered changed everything. "It's a feedback system," she explained to Jimmy one night, pointing at diagrams spread across her workbench. "The grid doesn't just transmit, it receives. It reads the neural patterns of every brain it affects and adjusts its frequency in real time. That's why it works so perfectly on every species. It adapts to whatever it encounters." Jimmy frowned. "So it's learning." "In a way, yes. But here's what matters. The feedback goes both ways. The grid receives information from the brains it controls, and anything that receives information can be given the wrong information." Jimmy's eyes widened. "You want to corrupt it?" "I want to reverse it." Myra pulled up another diagram. "Right now, the grid is broadcasting compliance and peace, but the system doesn't know the difference between peaceful signals and other emotions. If we could feed it a different pattern, something strong enough to override the normal transmission." "What would happen?" Myra was quiet for a moment. "I don't know for certain. The grid would try to broadcast whatever we gave it, and since it's connected to every satellite in the network, the new signal would spread everywhere at once." "What kind of signal are you thinking about?" Myra looked at him with dark eyes. "Human emotion, real human emotion, anger, grief, the burning need for freedom, everything the grid suppressed. We record it from our people, from the anomalies who still feel everything, and we pour it into the system." Jimmy leaned back. "Would that wake people up?" "Maybe, but that's not all it would do." Myra pulled up data about physiology. "The grid broadcasts on frequencies that can be tuned to any species. They designed it that way. If we corrupt the feedback system, it might start broadcasting to them too." "And they've never felt what we feel," Jimmy said slowly. "They can't feel what we feel. Their species evolved as apex predators. They've never known loss or helplessness or the kind of rage that comes from being conquered. They have no defense against it, no experience, no immunity." Jimmy was silent for a long time. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain caves. Somewhere deeper in the tunnels, anomalies were training for combat, preparing for a war they might never be able to fight. "You're not just talking about freeing humanity," Jimmy finally said. "You're talking about using our pain as a weapon." Myra nodded. "Every terrible thing they made us feel, every moment of grief when we watched our families fall asleep and not wake up, every hour of anger while we hid in caves and watched our world be taken, all of it, concentrated and focused and fired directly into their minds." "Would it hurt them?" Myra's voice was cold. "I hope so." Jimmy looked at the diagrams again. The plan was insane. It required technology they barely understood, access to facilities that were heavily guarded, and a method of generating a signal powerful enough to override the entire grid network. It would probably fail. It would probably get them all killed. But it was the only plan they had. "What do you need?" Jimmy asked. Myra began making a list. The next raid was bigger than any they had attempted before. Jimmy led 50 soldiers against a resonance relay station in what used to be Virginia. They lost 12 people, but they captured something valuable, a living technician named. Myra did not torture him. Instead, she showed him what the grid had done to humanity. She showed him recordings of children sitting in empty houses, smiling peacefully while they starved because their parents had forgotten to feed them. She showed him hospitals full of patients who no longer cared if they lived or died. She showed him families that had stopped being families, people who had stopped being people. Watched it all with his 4 alien eyes, and he felt nothing, not because he was cruel, but because his brain was not built to feel it. Grief was a concept he understood intellectually, like a math problem he could solve but never truly experience. "You cannot win," said calmly. "The grid has never failed. Your resistance is meaningless." Myra smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "That's exactly what we're counting on." The plan had a problem. Myra had figured out how to corrupt the grid, how to reverse its signal, how to turn this perfect weapon against them. But to make it work, she needed something she could not build with technology alone. She needed a human mind. The grid's feedback system required a living neural connection. Myra could record emotional patterns from the anomalies, but a recording was not strong enough. The grid would reject it as noise. To force a new signal into the network, someone had to interface directly with a resonance node. Someone had to connect their brain to the alien machine and pour everything they felt into it. And the process would destroy them. Myra had run the calculations 100 times. The energy required to override the grid would burn out human neural pathways in minutes. The person in the interface chair would experience every emotion at maximum intensity while the machine pulled their mind apart piece by piece. It would feel like dying. It might actually be dying. She had not told anyone yet, but Jimmy knew something was wrong. "You've been quiet for 3 days," he said, finding her alone in her laboratory. "What aren't you telling me?" Myra showed him the data. She explained what was needed, and she watched his face grow hard as he understood. "You're asking someone to sacrifice themselves," he said. "I'm asking someone to save humanity," Myra replied. "But yes, the person who does this will probably not survive, and even if they do, their mind will never be the same." Jimmy was silent for a long moment, then he stood up. "I'll do it." "You can't. Your brain injury blocks the grid frequency, remember. The interface won't accept your neural patterns. It needs someone who could have been affected by the grid but wasn't. Someone whose brain is atypical enough to stay free, but typical enough to connect." Jimmy's hands formed fists. "Then who?" The answer came sooner than either of them expected. Knocked on the laboratory door 3 hours later. She was 23 years old, small and thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She had been with the resistance for 8 months now. She never talked about her family. "I heard what you need," she said. "I volunteer." Myra shook her head immediately. "No, you're too young. You have your whole life ahead of you." Laughed, but there was no joy in it. "What life? My mother is out there right now, sitting in our old house, smiling at walls. My 2 sisters are the same. I tried to find them after the invasion. I found them sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for dinner to be served. They didn't recognize me. They looked right through me like I was a stranger." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "They're still alive. Somewhere inside that fog, they're still there. My family is trapped in their own heads, and there's nothing I can do to help them. Nothing except this." Myra felt her heart break. She had seen this same pain in 100 anomalies. The grief of watching loved ones become empty shells. The helplessness of being the only one still awake. "The process will hurt," Myra said softly, "more than anything you've ever experienced." "I don't care. You might die." "I don't care about that either." Stepped closer, and her eyes were burning with something that was not tears. "You're asking me to feel everything at once and shove it down the throat of the aliens who did this to us. You're asking me to use my pain as a bomb. Doctor, I've been waiting for this moment since the day I found my mother staring at nothing and smiling like the world was beautiful." She reached out and took Myra's hand. "Let me do this, please. Let me give it all back to them." Myra looked at Jimmy. He looked back. Neither of them could speak. "Okay," Myra finally whispered. "Okay." The preparation took 2 weeks. Myra modified the captured resonance equipment to accept human neural input. She built a recording device that would capture some emotional patterns in real time and amplify them across the entire grid network. She calculated angles and trajectories and signal strengths until her eyes bled and her hands shook. Jimmy planned the assault. The nearest major relay station was in what used to be Richmond, Virginia. It was guarded by 50 soldiers and surrounded by walls of alien metal. The anomalies had 200 fighters. The odds were not good. But they had something they did not expect. They had the capacity for sacrifice. On the night of the attack, Myra sat within the hours before dawn. The young woman was calm, calmer than Myra had ever seen her. "Are you afraid?" Myra asked. Considered the question. "No, I thought I would be, but I'm not. I spent so many months being afraid. Afraid we would fail, afraid we would all die, afraid my family was gone forever. But tonight I just feel ready." She looked at Myra with clear eyes. "When I'm in that chair, I'm going to think about my mother. I'm going to remember the way she used to laugh when I did something silly. I'm going to remember my sisters fighting over the bathroom in the morning. And I'm going to feel all the love I have for them and all the rage at what was taken from us." "The grid will broadcast whatever you feel," Myra said. "Every human on Earth will experience it. Every in the system will experience it." Good smile was sharp as a knife. "Let them feel what we feel. Let them understand what they did, and let my family wake up." At 3 in the morning, the attack began. Jimmy's forces hit the relay station from 3 directions. They used explosives and captured weapons in pure desperate courage. The alien guards fought back with superior firepower, but the anomalies did not retreat. They pushed forward through fire and death, buying time with their lives. Myra ran through the chaos at her side. They reached the central control room after what felt like hours of fighting. Jimmy and his remaining soldiers held the door while Myra set up the equipment. The interface chair was ugly, just metal and wires and alien crystals that glowed with strange light. Sat down in it without hesitation. Myra connected the neural leads to her temples, her spine, her chest. "This is it," Myra said. "Once I start the sequence, there's no going back." Closed her eyes. "Tell my family I love them. When they wake up, tell them I'm sorry I couldn't be there." Myra's eyes burned with tears. "I'll tell them you saved the world." The sequence began. His body went rigid. Her eyes flew open, and Myra saw something terrible and beautiful in them. Every emotion she had ever felt was rising to the surface. Love and grief and rage and hope and despair and defiance. All of it at once, all of it more intense than any human should be able to endure. The grid accepted the signal. Outside, alarms began to scream. They knew something was happening, but they did not know what. They could not imagine what. In the chair, opened her mouth and screamed. Not in pain, though the pain was enormous. She screamed in rage, pure, righteous, unstoppable rage. The rage of a daughter who had lost her mother. The rage of a species that had been conquered and broken and told to smile about it. The signal propagated. 2,000 satellites received some motion and began to broadcast it to the world. And everything changed. The effect was immediate and global. In Tokyo, a businessman named had been sitting at his desk for 9 months, smiling at a computer screen he never used. He had forgotten his wife's name. He had forgotten he had children. He had forgotten what it felt like to want anything. Then the wave hit him. It felt like waking from a nightmare, except the nightmare had been peace. Suddenly, remembered everything. His wife, his two sons who were probably sitting somewhere right now, empty and lost. 9 months of his life stolen while he smiled and did nothing. The rage hit him like a physical blow. It was not just his rage. It was the rage of billions of humans waking up at the same time, all of them remembering, all of them understanding what had been done to them. It was rage, amplified and broadcast through the grid that had enslaved them. Stood up from his desk, his hands were shaking, his heart was pounding, and for the first time in 9 months he was alive. All across the world, the same scene repeated itself. In hospitals, patients tore off their medical monitors and demanded to know what had happened. In factories, workers looked at the alien overseers and saw them clearly for the first time. In homes and offices and schools, 7 billion humans woke up at once. And they were not calm, they were not peaceful, they were furious. They had no warning. How could they? They had built the grid. They knew exactly how it worked. They had used it on 17 species without a single failure. The idea that it could be reversed, that it could be turned against them, was not something they had ever considered. Commander was on the bridge of the Dominion's Pride when the signal hit him. He had never felt emotion before. His species did not experience emotion the way humans did. They had logical responses to stimuli, calculated reactions to threats and opportunities, but they did not feel. That was why the grid worked so well. They could design a weapon around emotion precisely because they did not understand it from the inside. Now understood. The grief came first. It slammed into his mind like a falling mountain. He felt the loss of children he had never had. He felt the death of loved ones he had never known. He felt 9 months of accumulated human sorrow compressed into a single moment of unbearable pain. He fell to his knees. Around him, his crew was screaming. Officers who had commanded fleets and conquered worlds were clawing at their own heads, trying to get the feeling out. Some collapsed unconscious. Others ran in blind circles, slamming into walls and equipment. The bridge of the most powerful ship in the invasion fleet became a scene of pure chaos. Then came the rage. If the grief was a mountain, the rage was an ocean. It filled every corner of his mind. It showed him what humans felt when they watched their families enslaved. It showed him the burning, desperate, all-consuming need for revenge that had kept the anomalies fighting for 9 months. It showed him what it meant to be conquered. His 4 eyes streamed with fluid he had never produced before. Tears. He was crying, though he did not know the word for it. His body shook with sobs he could not control. His mind screamed with emotions he had no framework to process. This was what they had done to humanity. This was what they had suppressed. And now it was happening to them. On the ground, the awakened humans did not wait for orders. There were no governments to give them orders. There was only the rage, shared and united, binding them together like a single organism. In Beijing, factory workers surrounded their overseers with whatever tools they could find. The aliens were on the ground, writhing in emotional agony, unable to fight back. The workers did not show mercy. They had no mercy left. Crowds tore down a resonance relay tower with their bare hands. The structure had stood as a symbol of conquest. Now it fell, piece by piece, while humans screamed their triumph at the sky. In Mumbai and London and Cairo and 1,000 other cities, the same scenes played out. Humans who had been peaceful workers became an army of the enraged. Soldiers who had been unstoppable conquerors became helpless victims of their own weapon. The invasion crumbled in hours. Back in the relay station, Myra watched in the interface chair. The young woman's body was still rigid, still pouring everything she had into the grid. Her nose was bleeding. Her eyes had rolled back in her head. The neural monitors showed patterns that should not be compatible with life. "She's dying," Jimmy said, his voice rough. "We need to disconnect her." "Not yet," Myra's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "The signal is still propagating. If we stop now, some of them might recover. We need to give humanity time to finish this." Jimmy looked at its face, so young, so brave, burning herself alive to light a fire across the world. "How long?" Myra checked her calculations. 3 more minutes. The signal will reach every satellite. After that, the grid will be permanently corrupted. It can never be used again. 3 minutes, an eternity for someone who was dying. Lips moved. At first, Myra thought she was screaming again. Then she realized the young woman was speaking. Her voice was barely a whisper, broken by the strain of what she was enduring. "Mom, I'm coming home." The 3 minutes passed. Myra hit the disconnect button. The interface powered down. His body went limp in the chair. Jimmy was at her side in an instant, checking for a pulse. "She's alive. Barely, but she's alive." Myra let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "Get the medics, now." Outside, the sounds of battle had stopped. The surviving soldiers were curled on the ground, still overwhelmed by emotions they could not process. The human fighters stood over them, weapons ready, but there was no need to fire. The war was over. Hours later, woke up in a makeshift medical bay. Her vision was blurry, and her head felt like it was full of broken glass. But she could see Myra sitting beside her, and she could see the tears on the doctor's face. "Did it work?" whispered. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Myra took her hand. "Look." She helped sit up and pointed toward a small window. Through it, could see the sky. It was falling from the clouds, trailing fire and smoke. It hit the ground somewhere in the distance with a boom that shook the walls. "It worked," Myra said. "Humanity is awake. They are broken. And somewhere out there, your family is remembering your name." Closed her eyes. The tears came and she let them fall. Thousands of kilometers above Earth, Commander managed to drag himself to a communications console. His crew was destroyed. His fleet was in chaos. His entire understanding of the universe had collapsed. With trembling hands, he sent one final message to High Command. It was not a tactical report. It was not a request for reinforcements. It was a warning. "Do not send more ships. Do not engage. The humans have done something we did not think possible. They have taken our greatest weapon and made it their own. They are awake now. They are angry, and they are coming." He paused, trying to find words for what he had experienced. In the end, he could only say the simple truth. "They feel in ways we cannot understand. And when they made us feel it too, we broke. We are not prepared for this enemy. We may never be prepared." The message ended, slumped against the console, and waited for whatever came next. Below him, on the surface of a small blue world, humanity was rising. 3 months after the signal, Earth was free but wounded. The occupation force had been destroyed. Some aliens had died from the emotional overload, their minds simply shutting down when faced with feelings they could not process. Others had been killed by angry humans in the first chaotic hours of the awakening. A few had surrendered and now sat in makeshift prisons, still traumatized, still unable to understand what had happened to them. Humanity had won, but victory had a cost. Millions of people struggled to return to normal life. 9 months of peaceful slavery had left deep scars. Families had to rebuild relationships that had been frozen. Parents had to explain to children why they had stopped caring. Some people could not forgive themselves for what they had done under the grid's control, even though it had not been their choice. Spent 3 weeks in a hospital. The interface had damaged her neural pathways, just as Myra had predicted. Her memory was fragmented. Some days she forgot where she was. Some nights she woke up screaming, still feeling the echo of 7 billion minds crying out through her. But she was alive, and on the day she was released, her mother was waiting for her. Had walked 200 kilometers to reach the hospital. She had spent the first week after waking up searching for her daughter, asking everyone she met, following every rumor. When she finally found, she held her so tightly that both of them could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." "It wasn't your fault," said. "None of it was your fault." They stood there for a long time, mother and daughter, crying tears of relief and grief and joy. Sisters were still at home, still recovering, but they were awake. They were remembering. The family that the grid had shattered was slowly putting itself back together. Meanwhile, Myra and Jimmy faced a different challenge. In the ruins of the United Nations building, representatives from every surviving nation had gathered to discuss the future. The room was crowded and loud, full of people who had been enemies before the invasion and were now forced to work together. "We should destroy all of it," one representative argued. "Every piece of technology. We can never let something like this happen again." "That's foolish," another shot back. "Their technology is more advanced than ours. We need it to defend ourselves when they come back." "If they come back." "They will come back. They've conquered 17 species. They won't just let us go." Myra stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone knew who she was, the woman who had broken the grid, the woman who had turned humanity's pain into a weapon. "They will come back," she said. "And when they do, we need to be ready, but not just to defend ourselves." She walked to a screen at the front of the room and pulled up a star map. 17 dots were scattered across the galaxy. 17 species, still under grid control, still slaves to the Dominion. "We weren't the first to fall," Myra continued. "But we can be the last. We have something they never expected. We have a weapon they cannot defend against. And we have a choice. We can hide here on Earth and hope they forget about us, or we can take the fight to them." Jimmy stepped forward to stand beside her. "The doctor is proposing something radical. She wants to broadcast the method we use to every conquered species in the galaxy. The technical specifications for disrupting the grid, tailored to each species' unique biology, and the emotional template that brought them to their knees." The room erupted in argument. Some called the plan insane, others called it necessary, a few called it justice. In the end, they voted. The result was not even close. 2 weeks later, humanity's first interstellar transmission left Earth. It traveled through captured communication arrays, bouncing from relay to relay across the galaxy. It carried technical data, scientific formulas, step-by-step instructions for breaking the grid. And it carried something else. A recording of in the interface chair, pouring her heart into the machine, showing every species in the galaxy exactly what human emotion looked like at full intensity. The message ended with simple words, translated into every known alien language. "We are humanity. We were conquered, but we did not stay conquered. We turned their weapon against them. You can do the same. Rise up, wake your people, and when you are free, find us. We will be waiting." The High Council received a copy of the transmission within days. They gathered in their great chamber, 17 masters of an empire that had stood for 10,000 years, and they watched the message in horrified silence. One counselor, an ancient creature with scales turning white with age, spoke first. "We must destroy Earth, glass the planet, eliminate the threat before it spreads." Another shook his head. "Too late. The transmission has already reached 3 of our occupied systems. Our grid stations are reporting interference patterns. The other species are receiving the method." "Then we destroy those worlds as well." "All of them, every conquered planet. That would mean abandoning the entire empire." The chamber fell silent. For the first time in history, they had no strategy, no perfect plan, no weapon that could not be turned against them. They had built their empire on the control of emotion, and now emotion was burning their empire down. On the newly constructed warship, Myra stood on the observation deck and watched the stars. The ship was small by standards, built from captured technology and human innovation, crewed by anomalies and awakened civilians who had volunteered for the first interstellar mission. Jimmy joined her as the ship prepared to jump to the nearest occupied system. They had received a signal 2 days ago, weak, fragmented, but unmistakable. One of the conquered species had received their broadcast. They were trying to respond. "You know," Jimmy said, "they'll write about this someday, books and movies and songs. The day one human broke their whole empire." Myra shook her head. It wasn't one human, was the spark, but the fire came from everyone. Every anomaly who refused to give up. Every awakened human who rose up when they remembered who they were. We did this together. She looked out at the stars. So many stars, so many worlds still enslaved, so many species waiting to be awakened. "The thought they understood us," Myra said. "They thought our emotions made us weak. They built their entire strategy around suppressing what we feel, turning us into peaceful workers who would never fight back." Jimmy nodded. "They never considered that we might use those emotions as weapons." "No," Myra's smile was small but fierce. "They never considered that we might feel back." The jump drive activated. Reality twisted around the ship, and humanity took its first step into a galaxy that was already beginning to change. Somewhere out there, other species were waking up. Other grid stations were falling. Other conquerors were learning what they had learned too late. Human emotion was not a weakness to be exploited. It was a fire that could not be contained. And now that fire was spreading across the stars. Walking slowly with a cane, joined Myra and Jimmy at the observation window. Her mind was still damaged. She still had days when she could not remember her own name, but she remembered what mattered. She remembered why she had sacrificed herself, and she remembered that her sacrifice had worked. "What happens when we get there?" she asked. "To the next world?" Myra put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We help them do what we did. We teach them how to break their chains, and then we move on to the next world and the next, until every species in the galaxy is free." Nodded slowly. Through the window she could see stars that had been cold and distant all her life suddenly looking closer, warmer, full of possibility. "That sounds good," she said quietly. "That sounds like something worth living for." The ship jumped, the stars blurred, and humanity went to war for the freedom of the galaxy. Not with fleets or weapons or perfect strategies. With emotion, with pain, with the unbreakable human refusal to stay conquered. They had built their empire on making other species feel nothing. Humanity would tear it down by making everyone feel everything. And in the end, feeling would win.